We were already 100,000 points behind. And honestly, I thought this Foundry battle was finished. The enemy controlled most of the important buildings, and every time we tried to fight back, the same players kept shutting us down. But what happened during the final minutes turned this battle into complete chaos. Let's get into it. After losing nearly 700 million power during SVS, I honestly didn't expect to be jumping into another major battle this soon. Yet, here we are. The Foundry battle is about to begin, and looking at the matchup, this is not going to be an easy one. As you can see, my account is currently sitting at Fire Crystal Furnace 9 with around 600 million power. Even after recovering for days, I still have a huge number of troops sitting inside my enlistment office waiting to be brought back. At the moment, I have roughly 3.2 million troops available for battle, while another 2.4 million troops are still waiting for recovery. So compared to where my account was before SVS, I am definitely not fighting at full strength today. But that is part of the fun. Sometimes the best battles happen when everything is not perfect. Now, if we take a look at the opponent's side, things get even more interesting. There are several Fire Crystal Furnace 10 players in this matchup. Some of them have very impressive power levels, and one player immediately caught my attention. A 1 billion power account. The moment I saw that number, I knew there was a good chance we were dealing with a serious whale. Whether he dominates the battlefield or not, we are about to find out very soon. Meanwhile, our alliance members are slowly entering the battlefield one by one. Looking at our side, I would say around 4 or 5 players have very strong stats and should be able to put up a solid fight. The question is, will that be enough? Because Foundry Battle is not only about individual strength, it's about teamwork, timing, communication, and sometimes a little bit of luck. One strong player can make a difference, but a coordinated team can completely change the outcome of a match. So before this battle begins, I want you guys to make a prediction. Looking at the situation right now, do you think we are about to win this battle? Or are we about to get completely cooked? Let me know what your first impression is, because after seeing those FC 10 players and that 1 billion power account, I already had a feeling this battle was going to be far more intense than I originally expected. And trust me, what happened next was definitely not what I was expecting.
Now, before the battle even properly started, our teams had already been decided. Each player was assigned to different buildings and different objectives so that everybody knew where they were supposed to contribute. But as for me, I was doing what I usually do in almost every Foundry battle. Instead of immediately committing to one location, I started sending my marches to different buildings for reinforcements. The reason is pretty simple. At the beginning of Foundry, nobody really knows how the battle is going to develop. A building that looks safe now can suddenly become the hottest battlefield 5 minutes later. So my first goal was simple: get some early contribution points, support teammates, then adapt according to the situation. For all 5 of my marches, I used a 50-20-30 formation. At that moment, I had no idea where I would eventually end up fighting. I didn't know which buildings would hold, I didn't know which rallies would succeed, and I definitely didn't know where the enemy was planning to focus their attacks. Because of that uncertainty, I decided not to teleport immediately. Many times I've seen players rush to a building, teleport aggressively, and then get pushed out almost instantly. With the amount of troops I had left after SVS, I knew I had to be a little more careful. So while our stronger members started moving toward objectives, I stayed flexible and focused on reinforcement support. As soon as one of our region members started occupying a building, I immediately began sending reinforcements. At this point, there were around 12 players participating from both regions, and things were starting to heat up. Then came our first major rally. My friend Assassin launched a rally toward Prototype Site 1. Everyone was hoping this would be our first successful breakthrough. Unfortunately, the rally got defeated. The moment I saw that report, I knew this opponent was not going to be easy.
But Assassin wasn't giving up. He immediately started another rally. The problem was that my march was still returning from another location. I was sitting there staring at the screen, waiting for it to come back as quickly as possible. 2 of my marches were already garrisoned inside buildings. 3 others were outside moving around, and all I could do was wait. The second one of those marches returned, I instantly tried joining the new rally. I didn't want to miss another opportunity. While waiting for the rally to launch, I noticed something else. My strongest heroes were currently attached to a different march, so I started doing what many players probably do during intense Foundry moments, moving gear around. Removing equipment from one hero, equipping another, trying to squeeze every bit of power possible into the rally march. At this stage, every small advantage matters. A little more lethality, a little more health, a little more attack. Sometimes those differences decide whether a rally succeeds or fails. Once everything was prepared, I sent the march and waited for the rally timer. This time, I felt much more confident. We had strong players, we had buffs active, we had pet skills, and if you look at the battle reports, our stats were actually very impressive. So naturally, I expected a different result. But then, the rally got defeated again. And that was the moment I became really curious.
Reporting for
because
duty.
when you see reports showing over 3,000% stats and you still lose, you start asking questions.
Charge
What
swiftly,
exactly
flee.
are we fighting against? How strong are these players? What kind of bonuses are they running? And more importantly, how many more rallies are we going to need before we finally break through? Meanwhile, Assassin wasn't slowing down at all. Another rally was called almost immediately, and once again, I found myself watching my marches return, trying to free up space and get back into the fight as quickly as possible. At this point, the battle was turning into a constant cycle. March returns, join a rally, wait, attack, check reports, repeat. And believe me, things were only getting more intense from here.
At this point, I was doing the same thing over and over again. The moment one of my marches returned, I immediately sent it back into battle. To save time, I even used the free march speed up so I could enter the rally before the timer expired. Every second mattered. While I was trying to join rallies, the situation on other parts of the battlefield was constantly changing. One of my marches that I had sent to another building ended up getting defeated because a stronger player was already holding that position. Meanwhile, another one of my garrisoned marches managed to secure a defensive victory, so it felt like every report I opened was showing a different result. Victory on one side, defeat on another. And honestly, it was becoming difficult to keep track of everything happening at once. At the same time, some of my alliance members were sending rally invitations. I wanted to join them. The problem was simple. All of my marches were already busy. Some were moving, some were reinforcing, some were returning, and some were sitting inside buildings trying to hold positions. So even if I wanted to help immediately, sometimes I simply couldn't. Then, once again, Assassin's rally got defeated. And seeing that happen repeatedly was frustrating, because every time we launched a rally, we genuinely believed we had a chance, but somehow the opponent kept holding. Even the buildings we were defending started coming under heavy pressure. One of the buildings where I had troops garrisoned was preparing to receive another enemy rally. So the moment my march returned, I sent it right back to Repair Facility 1 to strengthen the defense. At this stage, I was spending more time moving troops than actually watching my own city.
Don't discriminate.
Every march felt important, every building felt important, and every decision felt like it could change the outcome of the battle. Then something interesting happened. I noticed that my friend, Black Moogie, had successfully occupied Prototype Site 2. That gave us a small moment of hope. Finally, we had managed to secure something valuable. Meanwhile, our other players continued launching rallies against Prototype Site 1, and of course, I joined again. Before sending the march, I recalled my strongest march and moved all of my gear back to my main heroes. If there was even a small chance to improve the rally strength, I wanted to take it. The rally launched, the march arrived, the battle started, and once again, defeat. At this point, I started paying closer attention to the reports because something wasn't making sense to me. When I compared the stats, Assassin was sitting at around 3,200%, Globe was around 2,500%. On paper, that difference looked significant, yet somehow the result kept going in their favor. The more reports I checked, the more confused I became. Maybe there were factors I wasn't seeing. Maybe troop composition played a role. Maybe some hidden advantages were making a difference. Whatever the reason was, Globe was proving extremely difficult to remove. And while all of this was happening, the Imperial Foundry finally opened. This is usually one of the biggest moments in Foundry Battle. The building becomes available, everyone rushes toward it, and the battle often changes completely. Unfortunately for us, the opponents moved first. Before we could properly react, they had already secured control. When I looked at the scoreboard, the situation wasn't looking good. We were sitting around 30,000 points. The opponents had already crossed 60,000, a huge difference. And the worst part was that they controlled more buildings than we did. More buildings meant more points. More points meant more pressure. And more pressure meant we needed something to change quickly. I healed my injured troops and prepared for another round of rallies, but Prototype Site 1 remained a nightmare. No matter how many times we attacked, the defender continued holding, and while we were trying to break through, they were quietly collecting thousands of points, almost 6,000 points from that building alone. That is the kind of thing that slowly decides a Foundry Battle. Not one big fight, not one big rally, just constant point generation over time. Then I noticed another opportunity. My friend Masa had successfully occupied the munitions warehouse. Immediately, I sent reinforcements. At least we could strengthen the positions we already controlled. But even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Moogie lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then, with around 40 minutes remaining, the secret weapons workshops finally opened. The battlefield instantly became more chaotic. Players started attacking each other everywhere, burning cities, counterattacks, reinforcements moving across the map. For a few minutes, it felt like the entire battlefield was on fire. Since the mercenary camp had opened as well, I immediately sent a march toward a camp occupied by one of my alliance members. A little later, both mercenary camps were under our control. That was definitely a positive moment, but even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Moogie lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then, with around 40 minutes remaining, the secret weapons workshops finally opened.
The battlefield instantly became more chaotic. Players started attacking each other everywhere, burning cities, counterattacks, reinforcements moving across the map. For a few minutes, it felt like the entire battlefield was on fire. Since the mercenary camp had opened as well, I immediately sent a march toward a camp occupied by one of my alliance members. A little later, both mercenary camps were under our control. That was definitely a positive moment, but even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Mugi lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then, with around 40 minutes remaining, the secret weapons workshops finally opened. The battlefield instantly became more chaotic. Players started attacking each other everywhere, burning cities, counterattacks, reinforcements moving across the map. For a few minutes, it felt like the entire battlefield was on fire. Since the mercenary camp had opened as well, I immediately sent a march toward a camp occupied by one of my alliance members. A little later, both mercenary camps were under our control. That was definitely a positive moment, but even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Mugi lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then, with around 40 minutes remaining, the secret weapons workshops finally opened. The battlefield instantly became more chaotic. Players started attacking each other everywhere, burning cities, counterattacks, reinforcements moving across the map. For a few minutes, it felt like the entire battlefield was on fire. Since the mercenary camp had opened as well, I immediately sent a march toward a camp occupied by one of my alliance members. A little later, both mercenary camps were under our control. That was definitely a positive moment, but even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Mugi lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then, with around 40 minutes remaining, the secret weapons workshops finally opened. The battlefield instantly became more chaotic. Players started attacking each other everywhere, burning cities, counterattacks, reinforcements moving across the map. For a few minutes, it felt like the entire battlefield was on fire. Since the mercenary camp had opened as well, I immediately sent a march toward a camp occupied by one of my alliance members. A little later, both mercenary camps were under our control. That was definitely a positive moment, but even then, the scoreboard kept reminding us of reality. They had 15 players, we had 13, and despite our efforts, they were still controlling more objectives. Soon after that, Black Mugi lost control of Prototype Site 2 as well. The opponents took it over. Another building gone, another source of points lost, and the clock kept ticking. That was probably the most frustrating part. Every failed rally wasn't only a defeat, it was also time disappearing, time that we couldn't get back. Then,
Now at this point, there were only around 30 minutes remaining in the battle. And if we looked at the scoreboard honestly, things were not looking good for us. The opponents were still ahead. They controlled most of the important buildings, and every minute that passed was helping them increase the lead even further. At the same time, the boiler room started receiving attacks from the enemy. This building was extremely important because once you lose key structures like this, catching up becomes even more difficult. But thankfully, our defenses were holding. Attack after attack came in, and surprisingly, we kept getting defensive victories. Every successful defense felt like a small win, not because it completely changed the scoreboard, but because it gave us something that was becoming harder and harder to maintain. Confidence. At this stage of Foundry Battle, confidence matters a lot. When a team starts losing multiple buildings, people naturally start feeling pressure. You begin checking the score more often, you start calculating the gap, and you begin wondering whether there's enough time left to turn things around. Meanwhile, another problem appeared. The 2 mercenary camps that we had worked hard to secure earlier were now gone. The enemy completely wiped us out of both camps, just like that. More buildings lost, more points flowing toward the enemy, and suddenly the situation became even more difficult. Then eventually, the boiler room also fell. The same opponents that we had been holding off finally managed to break through. At that moment, I remember thinking, how many more buildings can we afford to lose? Because every time we secured something, the enemy seemed to respond immediately. And that was probably the most impressive thing about them, their reaction speed. The moment a building changed ownership, they were already moving toward it. No hesitation, no delay, just constant pressure. Then one of my alliance members managed to occupy prototype side again. The second I saw that happen, I immediately looked around the battlefield. And then I noticed something. Glob had teleported nearby. The moment I saw his city sitting there, I already knew what was coming next. There was no way he moved there without a reason. He was recalling marches from another area, preparing, waiting, getting ready for another attack. Everyone watching could probably predict what was about to happen. Sooner or later, that building was going to be challenged. The question was not if, the question was when. And honestly, that was one of the most stressful parts of the entire battle. You know an attack is coming, you know who is coming, you know how strong they are, but all you can really do is prepare and wait. While all of this was happening, most of the battlefield was still under enemy control. Every time we looked around, enemy flags seemed to be everywhere. They controlled key objectives, they controlled important scoring buildings, and they controlled the pace of the match. But despite all of that, nobody on our side stopped fighting, and that is something I genuinely respect, because it is very easy to keep pushing when you're winning. The real challenge is continuing to fight when things are not going your way, when the score is against you, when rallies keep failing, when important buildings keep changing hands. That is when you find out what kind of team you actually have. And our team kept trying. We kept launching attacks, we kept reinforcing, we kept healing troops, we kept looking for opportunities, even when the situation looked bad. And then, something started changing. Very slowly at first. I began noticing more and more blue markers appearing across the battlefield. My alliance members were becoming more aggressive. They were launching fresh attacks, they were regrouping, and they were refusing to give up. At first, I thought maybe it was just a few isolated attacks, but then it kept happening. Another building, another rally, another push, another attempt, and suddenly the battlefield started feeling different. The energy changed. Instead of reacting to the enemy, we started creating pressure ourselves. That was the moment I stopped focusing on the scoreboard, because sometimes staring at the score only makes things worse. Instead, I started paying attention to what my teammates were doing, and they were everywhere, fighting, reinforcing, capturing, retaking, trying everything possible to close the gap. Then naturally, everybody's attention shifted towards one location, repair facility, because at this point, the points being generated from that single building were absolutely insane. Over 8,000 points from one building. Just imagine that for a moment.
One building generating that many points can completely influence the outcome of a battle, which meant whoever controlled it gained a massive advantage. And of course, everybody knew it. The enemy knew it, we knew it, the entire battlefield knew it. That's why players started gathering around Repair Facility. Not just one or two, almost everybody, because controlling that building could potentially change everything. The problem, the player holding it was incredibly strong. Every report we checked reminded us of that fact. Every rally showed us that fact. Every failed attack reminded us of that fact. But despite the difficulty, nobody wanted to stop, because if there was any chance left to change the direction of this battle, it was probably going to happen right here, around Repair Facility. And that is exactly where things started becoming absolutely chaotic. Rallies were being launched, troops were moving everywhere, buildings were changing hands, cities were teleporting constantly. And for the first time in the match, it actually felt like anything could happen. The real battle was finally beginning.
Now, with around 25 minutes still remaining, the battlefield was becoming even more active. At this point, nobody was thinking about playing safe anymore. Everybody wanted points. Everybody wanted buildings, and everybody wanted to contribute before the match ended. The attacks were happening almost everywhere. Every few moments, another report would appear, another rally, another defense, another battle. And honestly, this was probably one of the busiest moments of the entire match. While all of that was happening, one of my friends noticed something interesting. The center didn't look as heavily defended as before. For a brief moment, there seemed to be an opportunity, and immediately the discussion started. Should we try attacking the Imperial Foundry? Because if we somehow managed to take control of the center, that could completely change the flow of the battle. Now, I don't know if this was actually true or not, but personally, I started wondering about something. What if this was part of the enemy's plan? Think about it. Most of us were already focused on Repair Facility. Most of the fighting was happening there. Most of the rallies were happening there. So what if they wanted us to gather around one location while they quietly controlled everything else? Again, this is only my own thought process during the battle. I have no way of knowing if that was their strategy. Maybe the center was genuinely weak. Maybe it wasn't. But when you're in the middle of a Foundry battle, you start thinking about all kinds of possibilities, especially when the opponents are already ahead. At that stage, every movement feels important. Every teleport feels important. Every building feels important. And every decision could potentially decide the next few minutes. For our side, the objective was still very clear: Repair Facility. That was where most of our attention was going. That was where the important fights were happening, and that was where we believed we had the best chance of making something happen. As for me, even with 20 minutes remaining, I still wasn't thinking about moving toward the center. Not yet. The fights around Repair Facility were already intense enough. There were rallies being launched, players were reinforcing constantly, buildings were changing ownership, and I felt my troops would be more useful supporting those battles instead of abandoning them. At the same time, I kept watching the map, watching the score, watching the movements of both teams, because one thing was becoming very clear. The final 20 minutes were going to decide everything. And from this point onward,
the battle only became more chaotic. Now, this was the point where things started changing again, and not necessarily in a good way. While I was busy watching the battles around the buildings, I suddenly noticed something happening to my friend Assassin. His city was getting attacked again and again and again. The enemy wasn't holding back at all. They completely burned his city and pushed him to the point where he was running out of available troops. At that moment, I realized just how much pressure some of our strongest players were dealing with throughout this battle. Because while most of us were focusing on buildings, rallies, and reinforcements, some players were constantly being targeted directly, and that can completely change your ability to fight. Then, while looking around the battlefield, I noticed something that somehow escaped my attention earlier. Prototype Site 2. The points from that building had become absolutely insane. Almost 12,000 points from a single building. The moment I saw that number, I immediately understood why everybody was gathering around it. No wonder there were rallies launching non-stop. No wonder players were teleporting nearby. No wonder everyone was trying to take it back. That building alone was becoming one of the biggest sources of points in the entire match. And if you leave a building like that under enemy control for too long, the scoreboard starts moving very quickly. Several of my alliance members immediately opened rallies against it. The moment I saw the rally timer, I used my speed-ups and rushed to join. At this point, I didn't want to waste a single opportunity. Every battle mattered, every rally mattered, and every point mattered, especially because I had another problem. With around 15 minutes still left in the battle, I still hadn't reached the minimum 180,000 contribution points. And if you've ever played Foundry Battle, you know that feeling. You start checking your points, you start checking the timer, and then you start doing the math in your head. How many more rallies? How many more attacks? How many more reinforcements? How many more points do I need? So while everybody else was focused on winning the battle, I was also trying to make sure I reached my personal contribution target before the match ended. Then the rally launched. Everybody was hoping for a breakthrough. Everybody wanted Prototype Site 2. Everybody wanted those points. But unfortunately, we got defeated again. And honestly, by this stage, I wasn't even surprised anymore. The opponents were simply strong, very strong. Most of their major players were sitting around 900 million power, and it wasn't just power. The stats were good, the heroes were good, the coordination was good. Every time we challenged them, they made us work for every single point. Still, we weren't giving up. One of our alliance members managed to launch another attempt at the building, and for a moment it looked like we might actually have a chance. But there was still another major problem. Glob. No matter where we went, no matter which building we attacked, no matter what plan we tried, Glob always seemed to appear. It was almost like every important fight somehow led back to the same player. And after fighting against the same defender repeatedly, people were starting to get exhausted. Not because they didn't want to fight, but because every failed attack costs time. Every failed attack costs troops, and every failed attack makes the next attempt even harder. Meanwhile, several of my alliance members started teleporting toward the center. The focus was beginning to shift, and this time the plan actually sounded pretty good. Assassin noticed something important. Glob wasn't at the center, at least not yet. And if that was true, and maybe this was our chance, maybe we could capture the Imperial Foundry before the strongest defender arrived. Maybe we could finally secure something valuable. Maybe we could start closing the gap. So players started moving, troops started marching, rallies started forming. Everybody wanted to take advantage of the opportunity before it disappeared. For the first time in quite a while, there was a little bit of optimism, a little bit of hope, because opportunities like this don't appear very often. The battlefield was chaotic. Buildings were changing hands, players were moving everywhere, and if there was ever a moment to make a bold play, this felt like it. But then, just when we thought the center might be open, just when we thought we finally had a chance, a familiar name appeared again: Glob. The moment I saw that city near the center, I already knew things were about to get complicated. And trust me, what happened next completely changed the atmosphere of the battle.
So after all of that fighting, something finally went our way. One of our alliance members successfully secured the Imperial Foundry. And for a brief moment, it felt like we had created an opening. The center was ours. The battlefield was still active, and there was still time remaining on the clock. The only problem? The score. Even after taking such an important building, we were still trailing by nearly 100,000 points. That gap was massive, and everybody knew it. At that point, nobody was pretending the situation was easy. We all understood how difficult it would be to recover from that difference. But despite that, the fighting never stopped. Then, just as expected, a familiar name appeared once again: Glob. No matter where the important battles happened, somehow that player always managed to be involved. And the moment Glob arrived near the center, the entire atmosphere changed again. The opponents immediately started gathering nearby. Cities began teleporting closer. Troops started moving everywhere. Rallies started forming, and suddenly, the Imperial Foundry became one of the hottest locations on the entire battlefield. Meanwhile, my garrisoned marches were slowly returning one after another. Every returning march gave me another opportunity to do something, another opportunity to score points, another opportunity to contribute before the battle ended. So instead of sitting still and watching the final minutes pass, I started preparing for my next move. At the same time, arsenal supplies were appearing everywhere. Buildings were being defeated, occupations were changing, and every time a building changed ownership, supplies started scattering across the battlefield. Players from both sides were rushing toward them, because at this stage, every point mattered, especially for players who were still trying to increase their personal contribution score. One of my final marches was still sitting inside a building, and honestly, I was almost waiting for that building to fall. Not because I wanted to lose it, but because I needed my march back. I needed another opportunity to attack, another opportunity to collect points, another opportunity to stay active until the very end. That is usually what I do during the final phase of Foundry. Once the outcome becomes difficult to reverse, I focus on maximizing contribution. Keep attacking, keep moving, keep collecting points, keep participating. Because no matter what happens, the battle is not over until the timer reaches 0. Then, eventually, the center fell again. The opponents managed to retake it. And at that moment, it became clear that the comeback we were hoping for wasn't going to happen. Still, I wasn't interested in sitting back and waiting for the match to end. Instead, I looked around the map and started searching for another target. Which building should I attack? Which building was generating points? Where could I still contribute? After checking the battlefield, I made my decision. Prototype site. Immediately, I teleported nearby and started attacking. Again and again and again. At this point, I wasn't worried about preserving troops. I wasn't worried about perfect efficiency. I simply wanted to keep fighting. I used the same formation ratio I had been using throughout the battle. Sent the marches, waited for them to return, sent them again. Repeated the process over and over. And despite all of our efforts, the enemy barely moved. Every attack felt like hitting a wall. Every report reminded us how difficult it was to break through their defenses, yet I kept attacking anyway. Because sometimes, Foundry Battle becomes less about winning and more about refusing to stop. Then, something else happened. One of the opponents teleported right next to my city. At first, I thought maybe they were targeting somebody else. A few moments later, the attack started. My city began taking hits. Troops started getting injured. The defenses started dropping. And while all of that was happening, I still continued attacking the building because there were over 11,000 arsenal points available. And if that building fell, there was a chance to collect even more supplies. So I ignored everything else, ignored the attacks, ignored the pressure, ignored the burning city, and just kept sending marches. Looking back at it now, it was probably one of the funniest moments of the entire match. My city was literally being attacked, and instead of defending it, I was busy trying to squeeze out every last louse contribution point possible. If you watch until the end of the gameplay, you'll see exactly what happened. I didn't stop, not even when my city defenses reached 0, not even when the attacks kept coming, not even when the game finally decided I had suffered enough. Eventually, my city was forcibly relocated to a safe zone, and that was pretty much the perfect summary of this Foundry battle. Chaos. Absolute chaos. Now, after the battle ended, I spent some time thinking about everything that happened. At first, I won't lie, part of me felt like the matchmaking was rough. Part of me felt like the region assignment wasn't ideal.
Many of our strongest players were fighting in different regions, and naturally those thoughts crossed my mind. But after looking back at the battle reports and everything that happened, I realized something important. Just because a battle doesn't go our way doesn't automatically mean somebody made a mistake. It doesn't automatically mean the matchmaking was bad, and it definitely doesn't mean we should start blaming people. Sometimes the opponents simply perform better. Sometimes their coordination is stronger. Sometimes their timing is better. And sometimes they just have the advantage on that particular day. That's part of competitive events. Nobody wins every Foundry battle. Nobody wins every SVS. Nobody wins every event. Eventually, every player experiences both sides, victory and defeat. What matters is what we learn from it. And that's where I want your help. After watching this battle, where do you think we went wrong? Was there a better strategy we could have used? Would you have focused on different buildings? Would you have ignored prototype sites and pushed the center earlier? Would you have defended more or attacked more aggressively? I genuinely want to hear your thoughts, because every battle teaches something new, and many of the best ideas I've learned have actually come from reading comments. So whether you're a free-to-play player, a low spender, or a whale, share your opinion below. Also, tell me, what was your most memorable Foundry battle? Did you ever make a comeback from a huge point deficit? Have you ever faced a player like Glob who seemed impossible to remove? And what is the biggest lesson you've learned from Foundry battles so far? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. If you enjoyed the content and want to see more Whiteout survival gameplay, event battles, Dawn Academy progression, SVS preparation, and future updates, don't forget to show some support. Thank you for watching. Take care, and I'll see you guys in the next one.